There's no question that artificial intelligence is transformative, but what is it doing to big ERP and SaaS providers? Is it killing their revenue models? That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I am a software and technology attorney for the last 20 years. I've drafted and negotiated a variety of software related agreements and litigated software failures in courts across the country. So, what if artificial intelligence isn't just transforming software, but it's actually destroying the very business model that has built modern enterprise tech? It sounds dramatic, but the numbers are already flashing red. So far in 2026, software stocks have been hammered. SAP is down nearly 20% from about $237 at the start of the year to just under 190 as of March 13th. Oracle has fallen even further, over 20% year to date. That's not a random technology correction. I think investors are grappling with two conflicting fears at the same time. First, you look at AI and you wonder, I mean, is it going to break the traditional SaaS model, making those predictable recurring subscription revenues really a thing of the past? And second, you look at companies that are investing billions in AI infrastructure and they're not seeing any real returns, at least not yet. So I think on one hand, you've got this dichotomy. You've got Wall Street worrying about AI and will it destroy this old business model. And on the other, you've got skeptical issues associated with, are these AI investments going to make any real money? And the result is you're seeing it in the stock market, panic selling across the entire software sector. You've got to understand that the traditional SaaS model is really built on three pillars. You've got per user licensing, you've got high gross margins, and you've got what I would call product stickiness. The reality is you look at artificial intelligence and it's attacking all three of these pillars. So first, there's what analysts call seat compression, and you look at AI tools, AI agents, you think co-pilots or workflow bots that they can do the work of multiple human users. And so the reality of how that plays out in the software world is that means fewer paid seats, which directly hits the bottom line and hits a vendor's revenue. If you've got less licensed users that need to utilize the software because of the efficiencies of artificial intelligence, you have a problem. Second, I think this is overstated to some extent, but you've got vibe coding tools that are emerging. You've got Anthropic, you've got Claude, and these are systems that let users simply describe the functionality that they want, and then the artificial intelligence behind the scenes builds it automatically. The question is, instead of subscribing to 10 different specialized software vendors for SaaS or best of breed, warehouse management, whatever it is, can those companies just use these agents to generate the products that they need and have them match their exact workflow? And I think that's a real concern. It's certainly a concern that's impacting the value of these stocks. And then the third issue that you want to be aware of, or that you should be aware of, really is the underlying economics of all this is really shifting. And I think you look at the margins, and they in some ways they're collapsing. You've got historically top tier SaaS and software vendors would run incredibly lean. They've got gross margins between 80 and 90%, depending on the industry, depending on the vendor. The model essentially worked because one software instance could serve thousands of customers virtually and at marginal cost to the software vendor. I mean, the vendor's costs are really front loaded. I mean, once they've developed the platform, once they've developed the software, once they've written the code, they can create multiple instances of it, host it, and have multiple users. I mean, there's not much of a cost baked in on a going forward basis associated with that. Sure, you've got ongoing research and development, and they account for that through their services and maintenance subscriptions that are based on a percentage of what your spend. But this 80 to 90% margin is really starting to be a thing of the past. Really, the reason is I think AI upends that. You've got every prompt, every generated output, every interface costs money. And whether they're utilizing NVIDIA chips or cloud compute, AI software has to pay for every one of those interactions. And the result really is margin compression across the board. And so if you're looking AI first companies, to the extent that that's how they're classifying themselves, and to the extent they really are AI first companies, are now reporting 50 to 60% gross margins, and sometimes even lower. So I mean, the concern is real, and the impact to these stocks is certainly real, but is it overblown? Well, I think it very well could be. So you create an environment where, to maintain earnings, major SaaS vendors are hiking prices. In 2005, most enterprise software providers raise their subscription fees, and you saw fees increasing by anywhere from 10 to 20% across the board, which obviously is far above general inflation. And lately, some of them have gone a step further, and I would call it strategic bundling. You look at Microsoft, you look at Salesforce, you look at Adobe, they're all quietly behind the scenes embedding AI features into existing tiers and then bumping up the prices anywhere from 5 to 10%. And what's the catch? Well, customers got to pay for the embedded AI compute costs, whether they use those features or not. And it's a tactic essentially to offset AI's really real operating expenses. But I think they run the risk of alienating their clients, especially mid-market and small clients who simply don't need to use all of maybe the premium AI tools. But here's where things get interesting. And investors are simultaneously pushing SaaS stocks because AI might destroy their pricing models, and punishing AI infrastructure investment because spending hasn't yet translated into profits. And so that the circular logic leads to indiscriminate selling. And I think that's what you're seeing. And I think it's overblown here. The concern, you've got solid, industry veterans, industry stalwarts that are just getting hammered. And this has generated a kind of market panic where every software company gets dumped, regardless of their fundamentals. And I think you've got to look at the fundamentals. I mean, is SAP a risky company? Probably not. I mean, you can put aside the EU investigations and some of their, tactics and the lawsuits that they've been involved in. You look at Oracle, is it a particularly risky company? Probably not, putting aside aggressive tactics and the litigation that they're involved in as well. I mean, I think you look at this and it's really a fear-driven reset, and not unlike the post.com correction, if you're old enough to remember that. Only this time AI is both the savior and it's the threat. So there's a lot of irony here. And so I think you've got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So is this the end of SaaS as we know it? Is this the SaaS apocalypse? Probably not, but this is the end of easy money in cloud software. There's a fundamental shift that is happening. The next generation of winners in this industry aren't going to be relying on legacy subscription models. I don't think that's feasible going forward. I think what they're going to be doing is monetizing outcomes and usage rather than seats and users. Seats and users are, have been the traditional license metric since time immemorial. It's just a fundamental shift. ERP and SaaS aren't dead, but they're certainly being re-engineered around artificial driven value delivery, not static delivery models, software licensing and SaaS models anymore. So in short, the SaaS apocalypse isn't necessarily extinction. It's an evolution. And I think, like with any evolution, only, the most adaptive vendors are going to survive. What do you think? Is AI really killing SaaS, or is it just forcing it to grow up? You've got comments, put them in the comment section below, and we'll take a look at them, and maybe we'll develop another video around those. I think this is an interesting subject. If you've got questions about anything I've talked about, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you and point you in the right direction.